This is Reddit revenge. And here's the story you don't want to miss. I worked in a hospital data center where the air smelled like cold dust and burned coffee, and the server racks sang a constant metallic hum. On paper, we were network operations, guardians of the pipes that carry labs and imaging and orders, but in reality we were night watch, tape monkeys, alert readers, and professional escalators. The job had been flattened to the slowest skill level because half the staff were lifers from the green screen era, good people but out of step, and management wanted one rulebook for everyone. Into that room came Karen, seniority-made supervisor, not skill-made. She spoke in memos, smiled like a warning label, and treated every suggestion as a coup. After a merger demoted her to shift lead, she sulked through the 24/7 rotation and strangled anything she didn't understand. The morning my promotion email went out, she leaned over the console and said, very softly, "You will fail." I told myself to ignore it and do the work. Then a critical alert flashed red on her screen, the one that means, flip the queue so results flow. And she didn't move. She scrolled celebrity gossip, the clock ticked, and somewhere above our heads a care team waited for numbers that never came. I felt the room shrink around the blinking cursor and knew we had crossed a line I couldn't uncross. The procedure was simple. Acknowledge the alert, bump the interface, verify the feed, call if the queue didn't clear. We were the narrow throat between analysis and action. If we hesitated, nurses didn't get the data they needed. That day, a cardiac ICU patient was being prepped for surgery, and the white blood cell count never arrived. I'm not a clinician, but I know cause and effect when it hammers the glass. By the time someone upstream noticed the jam, the window had closed. The patient died. HR reviewed the chain and decided it hadn't directly caused harm. As if a house fire isn't your concern because you only ignored the smoke. Karen showed the remorse of a paperweight. I went home at 7 a.m., washed server dust off my hands, and realized the policy maze that protected her could also be mapped, learned, forced to work. If the system wouldn't defend patients from incompetence, I'd become fluent in the system until it did. But first I needed proof sharp enough to survive 1,000 excuses, and a lever no one could wiggle free of. So I began boring holes through granite. Every skipped acknowledgement, every cue left to choke while she printed recipes. Every deviation from the runbook became time-stamped, ticketed, screenshot, signed. Not petty gotchas, but life safety breaches documented in triplicate. HR has a ritual for this: verbal warning, first written, second written, final termination. I followed it like a lab protocol and watched the stack grow. Then Karen discovered her ritual. As a final warning neared, she'd file a harassment complaint, always a different name, triggering a mandatory 6-month investigation during which discipline froze. 6 months later, unsubstantiated, the clock reset, and the warnings expired like milk. Even the CIO admitted his hands were tied by the agreement. Meanwhile, good techs burned out, transferred, or stopped proposing improvements because any friction might become her next complaint. I stopped dreaming about firing Karen and started thinking about standards. What tool couldn't be argued with, delayed, or personalized into poison? Something objective, humane, and sharp. I didn't need punishment. I needed competence codified, and a way to lift everyone while removing the one person it would expose. The answer arrived like a clean network diagram. CompTIA Network Plus. Not a hazing ritual, not Cisco Deep, but a real baseline for people responsible for critical paths. Frame it as modernization, not purge. Tie it to better titles and a meaningful raise so it wasn't do this or else, but do this and rise. We'd carve study time on the clock, buy materials, cover testing and a retake, and give 8 months. No one could cry rushed. I believed everyone but Karen could pass with support. If I was wrong, the supports would make me right. More importantly, the department would gain transferable skills and stop feeling like a cul-de-sac. Patients would benefit from fewer fumbled handoffs. I wrote the proposal like a flight manual. Scope, budget, risk, equity guardrails, success metrics. Then I faced the only beast stickier than Karen. Red tape. HR, legal, compensation, the director, the CIO. Everybody had a stamp, and each stamp came with 6 hours of wordsmithing, may into shall and back again. I put the requirement in my own job description so no one could claim I'd carved myself an escape hatch. 3 years. I lived in conference rooms under bad lighting while committees argued the price of fairness. A certification tied to pay? What if they fail? Then we raised the supports. What if they still fail? Then the requirement did its job. The hinge always was money. Pass or else would spark mutiny. Pass and earn 20% more, with paid study time and mobility changes culture. I fought for the carrot because the stick alone breeds resentment, and the point wasn't fear, it was safety. Finally, signatures landed. CIO, HR, finance. We had 8 months on the clock. I posted a schedule with carved-out study blocks, off-site classes the hospital would fund, a Slack for questions, lab sims, flashcards by the time clock, and a calendar nobody could steal for a meeting. I sat in study huddles after my shift, answered subnetting riddle after subnetting riddle, and booked my own exam in the same window. When the first batch sat the test and came back grinning, I felt the room exhale for the first time in years, and I also felt one pair of eyes sharpening in the corner. Study nights turned social. People quizzed each other across the console. What's the default port for radius? Name the STP states in order. I watched veterans relearn curiosity and newer hires find their stride. I sat for my own exam at a 24-hour test center that smelled like dry erase cleaner and nerves. I passed, walked out at 2 a.m., and brought bagels for the next shift because winds should echo. Karen lingered at the perimeter, chin high, telling anyone who'd listen that real engineers don't need multiple-choice trivia. She booked her slot late, treated the objectives like optional reading, and smirked her way into the testing booth. She came back tight-lipped, then loud. The questions were unfair. We pulled her score breakdown and offered targeted help. She waved it off. I've been here longer than all of you, she said, like tenure could bend routing tables. The second wave passed. 2 more confetti emojis, more pay bumps posted like newborn photos. Karen booked her retake, then skipped 3 study blocks to lecture a coworker about respect. When the retake results landed, another fail, she announced HR would handle the conspiracy. HR, for once, had nothing to handle. The exam clock kept ticking toward a third attempt she swore she didn't need. And for the first time in years, I felt a deadline working in our favor, not hers. HR, allergic to appeals claims, offered a bonus third try to ensure fairness. And I loaded the runway. Extra paid study hours, a fresh LabSim license, mnemonics taped to the break room fridge. I even offered a one-on-one subnetting clinic. She declined, loudly. Meanwhile, the NOC kept transforming. People wrote better runbooks because they finally understood why the steps existed. Escalations dropped because the first line had teeth. Karen treated the room like a stage, telling anyone within earshot that this was harassment by spreadsheet. A decade-long vendetta designed to target a single woman. The irony. The policy was lifting everyone but her. On test morning, she strode in with fresh lipstick and the confidence of someone who'd never been told no by a system she'd gamed for decades. She returned pale, then red. Fail. Worse than before. A complaint was filed by afternoon, boilerplate, familiar, yet this time it didn't stop anything. Requirements are impervious to drama. They neither love nor hate. They sit, they wait, and they sort. HR calendared a role requirements meeting, 4:10 a.m. Friday. The subject line had no poetry, but everyone in IT could read between its lines. Termination day felt like fluorescent noon, even at 10. HR sat at the end of the small conference table, union rep at her right, my director across from me. The folder on the table was thick with policies I now knew by heart. Karen arrived late, eyes bright with the confidence of someone who believes the maze will bend again. HR read, measured as a metronome. Requirement adopted with notice, training funded, paid study time scheduled, exam vouchers provided, 3 attempts taken, results attached. Because you did not meet the essential requirement within the allotted period, your employment ends today. Denial blinked into bargaining. Grandfather me. I'm institutional knowledge. Then into anger. This is sexism, ageism, harassment. The union rep flipped pages, sighed through her nose, and closed the file without a word. Paper slid. Keys clinked. A badge came off a lanyard with a little static snap. For a beat, Karen waited for the universe to do what it had always done. Warp rules around her. Didn't. She stood, stared past me like I was furniture, and left a vacuum that sounded like the server room when the air handlers pause. I didn't gloat. I just wrote the time in my notebook and finally exhaled. The building exhaled with me. The first measurable change was mechanical. Acknowledgements hit within seconds, not minutes. We tightened thresholds, retired tribal workarounds, and replaced a haunted KVM that required a percussive maintenance ritual. People rewrote procedures with context newly earned, so the next person wouldn't have to guess. The second change was human. Shift handoff felt like passing a baton, not a live grenade. The jokes came back. Pizza on nights wasn't defensive eating anymore. It was celebration. 2 colleagues used NetPlus as a stepping stone. One jumped to a vendor's NOC, another into field support. They sent selfies with new badges. We cheered like we'd signed the offers ourselves. Others stayed, now paid like professionals and treated like it. New hires heard us mention Karen and assumed we were exaggerating. We traded a look that said, "If only." Most telling. The next critical alert hit and 3 of us moved at once like a trained reflex. Nobody checked the room for permission. The room had permission again. We were finally the operators our titles had promised we could be, and the hum of the racks sounded less like anxiety and more like purpose. I don't pretend there isn't a moral knot in what I did. I engineered a system change knowing it would likely cost one person her job. That's a hard sentence to like. But hospitals are places where tiny technical failures echo in human bodies, and a role guarding those seams cannot be ceremonial. Discipline hadn't worked because process can be slowed. Complaints hadn't worked because bureaucracy can be gamed. Standards did what politics couldn't. They lifted the floor for everyone and, in the same motion, revealed the one person who refused to stand on it. I won't pretend I didn't feel satisfaction, but it wasn't about revenge points. It was about walking past the ICU and knowing the numbers on those screens would arrive because people who know how were allowed to do their jobs. You can't put "removed a patient danger" through a 3-year standards lift on a resume, but you can sleep. And as odd as it sounds, the night shift finally felt quiet in the way it's supposed to. Boring, competent, safe. The kind of quiet patients never notice but nurses trust with their whole shift. I don't celebrate unemployment lightly, but Karen wasn't just difficult. She was a hazard. Getting her out was the most exhausting, calculated thing I've ever done, and it lives nowhere on LinkedIn. There's no bullet point for, engineered a 3-year culture shift that raised wages, improved safety, and finally removed a sociopathic bottleneck. There's just the quiet knowledge that patients are safer, coworkers breathe easier, and the server room hums with competence instead of dread. Sometimes, when new hires laugh at the Karen stories and assume they're exaggerated, I let them. The truth is heavier than the joke. For me, the real reward wasn't the congratulations from the CIO or the hugs from colleagues. It was walking out of that building on the day she left, hearing the air handlers kick on, and realizing the place finally sounded like it should. Steady, predictable, human-run, not ego-ruled. Now I want to hear from you. What would you have done in my shoes? Would you have endured her games, or spent years weaving a plan to finally bring her down? Tell me in the comments, I'll be reading. If the story hit home, hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss the next one. Share this video with a friend who loves a clever revenge story. Thanks for watching, and stay sharp.